I'm seeing certain trends, and one is I'm going to call up and one I'm going to call down. So are we leaving in this world in some fashion? There are stories about that. So some of you may be working to transcend all of this, to spiritually become attuned to the universe in a way that sort of removes you from things that are happening on Earth. And that is certainly one group. There's also a group that is very passionate about technology and how technology will save us, and how what we do with technology, how technology is going to be the future. Um, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So that's another up way of thinking, in my view. Um, and then there's the we're coming home. We're wanting to work with the earth. We're wanting to get our hands in the dirt. We're coming to ground, so to speak. And some of those people are literally doing that. Joe Brewer is certainly an excellent example of that, of saving rivers and changing bioregions. And people are starting to really look at how the earth works and to start to work with the earth so that we have water. And that means soil and all those things. So there's a whole group doing that. And then there are others, and you may be one of these, where it's just too darn confusing. I have no idea what to do. I love the earth. I want to do something. So there's a whole bunch of people who are fighting against oil and politics and trying to right wrongs, and that all needs to happen. Where that's going to take people, I'm not so sure. So much of that has an assumption about how things are going to actually stay the same in a certain kind of way. Oh, there'll be changes, of course, but we'll still have the internet. We'll still be, life doesn't really change all that much. We just have to get clear about working with the earth. There's a bunch of people who aren't paying any attention at all. It's just way too confusing to even think about. They even ignore or don't see the changes that are happening around them, or they're sure that the earth is going to right itself. She'll figure it out. We don't have to worry about it. This is a confusing time. This is a time when people really don't know what to do. It's called liminal for a very good reason. It's vague, it's ambiguous. The actions you take now, you may not see the results of for quite some time. It's not an immediate, I'll do this and this changes. It's like, I'll do this, and then maybe at some future date, I will see the impact or the results of that. And in the meantime, the earth is doing her thing quite apart, quite outside of our particular desires. So going up, the singularity, artificial intelligence is leaving the planet to, if we become extinct, where do we go? And I can talk about that. We don't disappear, and we'll be somewhere for sure. Are we making choices? Do we have to sacrifice? What do those things mean in this kind of time? The singularity, for those who may not have heard the term, have to do with the fact that humanity and technology come together and they become one in a way. And certainly there's a lot of mythology around that. We see it in our art and our movies. There are people who are quite enamored by the capacity of computers because they can work so much faster than our minds can. They can put together more data than our minds can. Does that make them better than us? What about robots? Are robots going to be the future? Are they going to do all the work? And so then we are free to do what exactly? I'm not sure where that goes. What do we do if we don't work? I think that's a mythology, frankly. People love to work. People need to work. And working is a spiritual path if you do it correctly. And it doesn't matter so much what you do, it's the how you do it. That's another whole long podcast we could do. The artificial intelligence, the big data, getting all this information, allowing us to see patterns we couldn't see before, to make connections that we couldn't make before. Like all things, that can be used for good or for ill. And I think this time is forcing us, quite literally, to dig deep to see where we are and who we are. Do we feel, as an individual, that things are out of control and need to be brought back into control? That humanity needs to control things? And that's the drive that I see in the technology approach to life. The singularity, all of those are about humans being able to control. And then the very interesting fear of, will machines control us? Will we make them so smart that they'll be able to control us? Again, this is a whole other podcast, but it is something that we are dealing with. And so the point of this podcast, this Emergent Reality podcast, is to offer you a chance to think about you. And where are you on the spectrum? What appeals to you? What do you find yourself compelled to pay attention to? Where is your energy going on this? Are you part of the spiritual release? Do you want a great transformation that's going to totally change humanity? That there is a jump that the human species is going to make in terms of consciousness. And this is an interesting one, and I will talk a little bit more about that today as well. But the choice that we make involves some kind of loss. And that's what I want to explore a little bit today, is what kinds of choices do we have? Are we doing this going up and away from our problems, either to another planet or to technology, which is going to control nature so that we don't have to worry about all of this? And if we make those choices, what are we losing? What are we sacrificing to do that? Or are we coming home? Are we becoming more embodied, not less? Are we actually more engaging with nature, hands in the dirt, very direct experience with nature, or less? Are we going to feel more connected to the planet, to the living biosphere that we exist in, or less? And are we going to choose this relationship, or are we going to transform? These, for me, are very, very deep questions. And I have a bias. I am not bias-free in this conversation at all, as you will discover. And you may already be able to discern where I fall in this continuum. But I want you to explore it. I want you to think about, is it more important? Oh, how would your life change if you were more embodied, more in touch with your body, with your emotions, with your feelings than you are now? Do you have an interest in gardening? Does it seem like work? Is it not comfortable for you to think about? I mean, so many of us have been so separated from the earth itself, from the real living being that she is. I mean, maybe you take a walk in the woods, but do you ever stop to look at the plants? Do you have a familiarity? Do you know their names? You can walk in the woods and enjoy the beauty of nature and not know any of these things and not care about it. So I'm asking you in this podcast to think about you and where are you? What's comfortable? Where do you want to spend your time? Where are you naturally drawn? What are your interests look like? What sorts of books and magazines are you reading now that fall on one side or the other? Are you coming home, learning more about the planet, or are you more involved in technology and getting away from the planet in some kind of way? Are you feeling more like you care about the planet? Or are you feeling more that you really want to figure out how to make change, to make nature do what you want to have happen? I think these are deep questions. They're not easily answered. And in many cases, some of you may feel pulled in both directions. I'm certainly not immune to technology. Uh, I don't feel caught in it, but I certainly do appreciate it. And I love the internet. I so hope we can keep that because it connects us. That is, and there is a discernment, I believe, in terms of technology. We're creative species. We like to make things. We like to make things different. That's, I think, very, very key to who humanity is as a species. So I'm not anti-technology, but technology that brings us closer to being human, as I feel the internet does, I can support that. But technology that drives us away from humanity is not, for me, a good choice. And some are very fine lines. So these are not easy decisions. These are not easy things to begin to understand about oneself. But I think we are called to do that. And I think we will need to do that because in this life, you have to make choices. You have to choose where to put your time and your energy, your talents and your treasure. And the clearer you can be about that, then the more profound your impact will be on how we transition in this time. So we're not alone. One of the joys for me of understanding who we are and where we are is truly spiritual, is truly fantastic. We are part of the life of the planet that has chosen to manifest in the way we have, in the forms that we have. And yet we're a biome. We're so not alone. I mean, in any sense of the word, there are 30,000 different species within our bodies. So we're not alone. And we're not us in terms of being only human. It's not possible to be only human. We cannot live without those other creatures. They make it possible for us to be alive here. That symbiotic connection has made this most complicated critter called human possible. So life was intentional. She has been working on complexity for 3.5 billion years, I believe. And she's probably pretty proud of where we are. We are quite an accomplishment. We are an expression of lots of life coming into agreement, a symbiotic agreement to be together. And it's so profound because if we don't live, they don't live. So they need us as much as we need them. And that love that comes, that we feel when we acknowledge that connection, when we get in touch with that connection, when we feel who we truly are, that joy, that confidence, that strength that we can touch into on an occasional basis, where everything just seems right, is for me that connection with all of us, all of the life that's within us, all on the same page. Doesn't happen all the time, but there are points when we know, we feel correct. Things are right. It is the way it should be. And we feel the love of life, love of for each other, for ourselves that we have in those instances. And I believe that is the path to transformation. So I don't see the transformation as getting away from the planet, but as getting actually embedded in the planet, honoring that connection. C.S. Lewis talks about the music of the spheres. He talked about the fact that every planet has a song, but the Earth hadn't found its song yet. And that for me means that's what will happen when we get to that place. Earth will have its song because we will all be singing. So I'm seeing this as an opportunity for us to take that step into that incredibly exquisite and wild and wonderful place, that journey into totally unknown symbiotic relationships, but consciously symbiotic relationships. I sometimes say that maybe we are the great brain we are, not because of us, of the human piece, but because we bring the wisdom, the old wisdom, mitochondria, the piece of ourselves, which is its own individual self. It's a different species. It's what gives us the power to live, our energy. That's old wisdom. Mitochondria has been making agreements with different parts of life for millions and millions of years. They've learned something in that process. They have a wisdom. And so maybe our brilliance, such as it is because we have access to all of that wisdom because we are us. So if we honored that, worked to bring that forward, where would that take us? Totally unexplored territory. And I'm kind of excited. The cyborg reality, however, there's really a desire to be better than human. There's this feeling that the fastness and the amount of data that computers can manage to compute is better than we can compute, or so we think. So therefore, they're better than human, which gets to this fear. Are they going to take over the planet? Are they going to take over us? Are we going to become slaves to the computer? But it's all very separate. You know, it's not like in all the stories we tell about this, sometimes there are groups of people who are cyborg. Star Trek, the cyborg was a thing, its own thing. But it was also separate. And it was very clear that it was separate from the rest of the universe, from other things. It was different from other things. So there's a huge stream or strain of separateness that is inherent in the technology sphere. And there's a huge stream of power that's in the technology sphere. And it's very much about power over. It's being able to manipulate other people, other worlds, our world, to force it to do what we want. There's a thread of conquest that runs through everything. Sometimes we call that thread of conquest colonialism. And I see so much of that technology piece bringing those pieces of our psyche forward. And I'm questioning what the purpose and intent of that is, actually. Are we choosing life when we do that? What are we conquering? What is the power over what? Those are interesting questions for me. And if this singularity approach, this high technology approach, is not embracing life, what is it embracing? Where is it going with all that? It's only been recently, interestingly enough, that we've actually started looking at life. I mean, life is, you can't ever, life is not visible except as it expresses through form. And it does that in so many ways. So creatively, so creative. So, you can't touch life. You can't touch that generative energy that runs through things. We can see it. We know it's there. We have a word for it. But what is life? We talk about love. Love is kind of the same thing, isn't it? We can't ever see it. We know it's there only because we have an experience inside of ourselves that we trust, that we believe is real because we've experienced it. So we know love exists. And yet we're also very good at shutting it off, not feeling it at all. We can bemoan the fact that we don't feel love, like it's somebody's fault that love doesn't exist, or that we can't touch it or not experience it. I used to look at these future, or these visions of the future. And so I'd ask you to think in your mind, or to even research a little bit if you want, to look at visions for the future. Almost always it's glass and steel. There's no green. There are no trees or plants of any kind. There are no animals, and there are no children. So how would children happen in a cyborg world? I mean, we can collect sperm, and we can collect eggs, and we can put them together in petri dishes, right? From what I know of life and biology at this point, and I'm not a biologist, but there is such a connection between life and life. I wonder what would happen if generations of children were born without that connection. What would happen? It doesn't feel good to me. And from what I know now of the planet and how it came to be, and how it's worked to make everything fit, everything works together to keep life here. So if we shifted to technological approach to life, what happens? We've already kind of cut that cord. That's, I believe, part of our sickness right now is our lack of connection, a lack of keeping that promise. This is the prime directive I talk about, that all life creates the conditions that support life. Thank you, Jeannie Bennett. So if that's what all life does, and we have chosen not to do that, I think that's what Adam and Eve is all about. That choice was to pay attention only to us and to start using things for our benefit instead of working for everyone's benefit. It hasn't turned out really well, or it looks like it might not turn out really well. Things seem to be resisting. Our surrounding areas seem to be not in relationship with us anymore. And that may have consequences. If the earth heats up the way it looks like it's going to, as it is, that has implications for everything that's learned to live within this very narrow range that we've been in for 65 million years. So if that changes, then things that are going to stay alive on the planet have to change too, and will change in order to stay alive. There's no option, really. So what happens with this cyborg reality? Life first. It's not a place that we're comfortable with or really familiar with. So it might be a bit scary. And it's interesting, when we think about keeping the planet alive, just as a mental exercise for a minute, you think about keeping the planet alive. Do you include humans in that? Do you feel that you're part of that? Or is the planet being kept alive out there and you're somewhere else? I mean, that's kind of how we've been raised. For me, that's the shift that we're making, is that when we say the planet is alive and the planet will continue to live, that includes us. And the planet can live without us. We know that's possible. We've watched other species go extinct. So there's no species that controls the planet, not even us. So if we're not here, I do believe the planet will continue. I mean, she is so creative in how she can make life happen in really hot spots, in really cold spots. There's still life. We found life everywhere. So something will continue for sure. And it may not be us, because we have a really narrow range, like 92 to 105, maybe. That's not a lot of degrees there. And we're changing. Some of us have changed our temperature from 98 to 97. So we are trying to cool ourselves down so that we can deal with a warmer planet. And that's great. But what happens if we consciously begin to work with what is happening and really work with the planet? One of the things that just is euphoric and breaks my heart at the same time is thinking about what the continent of North America looked like when Columbus came. It had been lived on for thousands and thousands of years by various human groups. We call them Indians. And they had learned to live in such a way that nature thrived around them. So when Columbus came, he saw this incredibly rich, vibrant country with huge stands of trees, old, large trees that had been alive for thousands and thousands of years. And all the new settlers could see was stuff to cut down and make into things. And so we did that. So there aren't very many places that are still the way they were then. So we don't know what that's like. We haven't had that experience. Each generation sees the world as it is, and that becomes the norm. And when it degrades over a lifetime, you notice as an individual, you can see that it's different than it was when you were a child. I've had that experience. I would suspect some of you have had that experience too. But we don't really know what it was like when everything was working together and everything was thriving. So I don't know what it's going to look like if we get back to that. But I do know that we can do it because humans have done it in the past, and there are still stories and memories of that that are carried by certain pockets of people who have stayed out of modern life. And I know that we know that when we feel in our body what's right, that's where we know that we are serving the connections that we all are. So I have no doubt we can get back there. But it does mean we have to unpack all these beliefs about ourselves, about how we live, about what's right, that we've been raised with, and that our families have been raised with, and that we have traditions around that don't serve the planet. When I watch how human children grow up, I've been a teacher all my life, and I've taught everything from second grade through college. I spent most of my life at college. I like to talk to people. But I can tell you, and I love high school kids. I just love high school kids. And I've taught a lot of high school kids. There's such an idealism at that age. You might remember that. Going to change the world. You can see what's wrong. You know how it should be. Well, we don't know how it should be, but we know it's not right. We do know that. And I think that that's the angst of the teen years. The enculturation they're getting to fit into what is not working is huge and painful. I think that's what teen suicide is so much about. Having to change oneself to fit into something that you don't like, that it doesn't feel right, but that's the only thing you can see there, is really hard for some people. We're not creating a world that our children want to be in. And we're certainly not creating a world that animals will be in. We are picking, maybe 50 out of the hundreds of thousands of animals that exist that we like, and we want to get rid of everything else. We tell our story about competition, that they're taking the food. Insects are taking our food, but there's not enough to go around, that we have to make sure they don't get anything so that we can have it all. And that's not how the world works. We are killing everything that doesn't serve us in some way, that we don't know serves us, that we don't think serves us. We are not inclusive, we're exclusive. We are simplifying the complexity of the world. And the world only works because so much needs to be done that not everybody can do it. So everybody does a little part. They do their own thing. And when they do that little contribution, it allows others to do their contribution. Yeah, that's what symbiotic relationships are all about. It's pretty fabulous, actually. But we chop that up and eliminate the possibilities of that happening in so many ways. You get rid of insects, you get rid of birds, you get rid of lizards, you get rid of frogs, you get rid of fish. I mean, all sorts of things live on insects. And the insect population has just crashed. So when you cut those links, you have huge, huge consequences and implications. So there's a lot of work to do to rebuild those connections, to ensure that those connections thrive. And that's work we can do. That's a great way to spend our time, our energy, our talent, and our treasure, is ensuring that everything else flourishes and discovering how to make that happen. And when we truly become partners with life, then maybe we'll become something else as well. Maybe we will transcend this separate belief and discover how we are connected to everything. We have a history of that. There are people in our various cultures who have done that over time. We call them saints. We worship them. How amazing it is that they're there. And yet I believe, and they will tell you, it's something everybody can do. Everybody can be. It's just getting rid of all the things that stop us. And it's not a small thing. I'm not diminishing that. But I'm saying it is possible. We have the capacity. And we've proved it to ourselves over and over again. But now we have to do it on a grand scale or not. I think that's where we are. That's the choices that we're making. So what are the similarities between the technological approach to life and the life approach to life? Both of them require joining, sort of losing ourselves into something else. So we can lose ourselves into a machine, into technology, or we can lose ourselves into plants and animals. We can surrender our identity, our understanding of who we are, to a machine, that we are sort of the host to something that has much greater capacity, more strength, more speed, more information crunching capacity than we do. Or we can surrender ourselves to ourselves and really discover who lives inside the bodies we inhabit and how we've managed to, what kinds of agreements we've made to keep ourselves on this planet in the form that we are. Where does God live? God, that's a wonderful question, isn't it? We could explore that. That's a whole other podcast too. I mean, the technological folks, I don't know what they think about God as individuals, but certainly it's not a conversation that you hear in that domain very much. And there's this kind of pride that we are becoming better, bigger. We can look at what we've made happen, what we can do. So I'm not sure where God is in that. Are we becoming God? If we're making robots, if we're making things that can replace us, isn't that sort of a God space in a way, is how we understood God in the past, at least? Or is God life? Is God love? We certainly talk about God as love a lot, but we've never included life as part of that conversation. I've never heard that in any Western thing. I've heard it in some Eastern things and certainly in some indigenous things. But in the civilized world, not so much. It's just astonishing to me that we've not paid any attention to life at all. So what would happen if God and love and life are all one? How would that change our life? And where is power? It's power over in the technological world. It's trying to to be able to control, to manage, to understand, to direct everything, anything, everything. And yet with life, it's about power with, learning to work together, cooperating, being symbiotic. And it turns out we're actually hardwired for this. I mean, we have to be, because that's how life has advanced over the years. As single cells went, oh my gosh, you, Mr. Cell over there, do something different. You know, I could use that. If you want to come over here and we can work together, we can do something. And so single cells became two cells, two-celled organisms, and then many-celled organisms, because they could see the value of cooperation. So we're hardwired to cooperate. We've chosen not to do that. What does reality look like in a technological space? I mean, I hear conversations about we're creating reality, we're making reality happen. We're actually controlling evolution. I've heard those conversations as well. When we're coming home, when we're working with reality, with other life, there's a curiosity there to discover what that will become. We can't know that because we're not the only individual making choices. We're surrounded by individuals making choices. And as we learn to listen to those choices and to work with them, we become more resilient and we become different. We are self-making and we are made by others at the same time. It's a both and situation. We've been denying the both and. We want to be self-making, but we have forgotten that relationship with others. And now's the time to bring that back. Now's the time to begin to revitalize that connection, I believe. What does it mean to be human? I think that's what we're asking ourselves at this point in time. Do we trust ourselves enough to be human? Or do we think we need to be something else, that we're not good enough to be human? Human beings are embodied. We are emotional. It is the emotions that connect us. It's the emotions that help us understand where others are, that empathetic shared experience that we have with plants and with animals and with other people. We can tell by the body language what the experiences have been of that particular individual we're looking at, whether it's a bug or a plant or another person. We know a lot about their life just because of how their body is shaped, because we have experienced it ourselves. So our emotions are so key to those connections. And it's through those emotions that we heal ourselves, our family, our culture. Being willing to acknowledge the pain, that doesn't mean wallow in it, but it doesn't mean deny it or hide from it either. And then work through that pain, understand what caused it, and to work to bring joy and ecstasy and curiosity and wonder back into those hurt places. We are the best example that we have of embodied consciousness on the planet. Now, it could be argued that whales and dolphins and maybe chimps. And the more you understand animals, you see the sentiments there, you see the wisdom, you see the intelligence that's there. And we're starting to see that in plants as well. And more on that in future podcasts. So there is more thinking going on in our surroundings than we've really ever understood. Everything has a consciousness. Everything has a level of awareness that fits for its existence in this time and space. But we also know there are other dimensions of reality. Certainly our emotions are that. We've all had transcendent experiences. When you understand that we're all one, if you've had that experience, people see auras. There are so many other things that seem to exist that we don't or haven't acknowledged in our Western way of life and have dismissed and tried to eliminate in one way or another. Again, we're so good at simplifying our life. We have not allowed the complexity that life is. And I think that's the opening. It certainly is, to be very mundane about it, when you're only involved in your own life, then when things impinge on you, they're surprise. You don't understand why somebody would be upset at what you said. You don't see the connections that we have. It doesn't mean they're not there, but we can create a space where we are not aware, we're not consciously acknowledging those connections, and we're not noticing them. So they can come out of the blue and be terribly surprising and painful because of that surprise. We have no idea that somebody would think that because it's not us. That's where there's difference. And yet there's sameness because we can experience that pain. We understand. We don't know why it happened. It may not hurt us, but it certainly hurt them. So it's allowing that complexity at greater and greater levels. When I talk about values, I talk about how we have expanded our circle of caring from our individual selves to our family, to an extended family, which may include friends, then to maybe a city, and then to a state, and then we have a country, and then we have the whole globe. So each circle has its own unique character, and it's always there, whether we pay attention to it or not. It's always there. It has a reality of its own. And when we ignore it, then it comes roaring through when it needs to. And it's a surprise and it's painful. If we can expand our consciousness out, if we can begin to see how things are connected, see the needs of each level of reality, and manage them in a way that brings joy and happiness and comfort and safety to each level of our experience, everything changes. Everything changes. That's what has happened in our bodies. We've got 30,000 different species that are all like gung-ho. Yes, let's do this thing. And we can dampen that down. We can choose to die. We can get them all to agree to die. And people do. We get sick. We do all sorts of things. We're talking to ourselves all the time, to all those other lives inside of ourselves. And they're accepting our understanding of reality and then responding in kind. Then that makes me feel, well, And we feel blah, or it makes me feel like I want to die. And people do, you know. So there's more to us than we know, just us, this body. Understanding this allows us to understand all the rest of that. And since nature's been doing this for a long time, I wonder why. Wonder what's on her mind. And I wonder if we are going to be astute enough to find out. So coming home, what does it mean to come home, to live regeneratively? We have to know who we are. And we can't sit in a cave and figure that out. We can figure some things out in a cave. But when you get out of the cave and start interacting with other people, oh my gosh, there's new information in the system, and that changes everything. So we really only know who we are in community. I am because you are, Ubuntu. And when we feel that connection, we feel that love of life that everything has. That's what nature gives us. That's why we like to be in nature. Nature loves life. It loves itself. It wants to live. And that's what's refreshing for us. That's what makes us feel good. We come back feeling whole, feeling recommitted to life because we've heard that song. So I'm suggesting that at this time, it is our job to learn to discern when we're supporting life and when we're not. When our life is supporting life and when it isn't. When our culture and those around us are doing that and when they aren't. And then to figure out how to bring us back into relationship. To grow into partnering with Gaia. I think this is going to be at a new level. I truly do. We've separated for a reason. I don't blame us. There is nothing wrong with having done that. We have taken it as far as we can and we see the results. And it's not what we want. It's not life-giving. We're seeing a planet that is having to shift dramatically to keep life going. Because life as it was designed in that 65 million years is no longer there. We have so decimated all those connections in so many ways that the planet has to figure out how to reconnect. And that's what she's doing, and she's going to continue to do that. There's no stopping that. We're not going to stop global warming or planet change, as I prefer to call it. It can't stop, but it can morph into, it can slow down, it can begin to heal. And we've seen how fast nature will heal if we just stop doing bad things to it. So we have that experience just in the last 3 years. I mean, come on, guys. So much has happened. Life is really wanting to live and wants us to live with it. Because we are an expression of life, but we have to be in partnership. So if we can make that change, we'll see what that looks like. There is no telling what that looks like because we're not coming at it in the same way we did. The indigenous people have an approach that is truly awesome. And they don't do some of the things that we do. So now it's about partnership. Not one or the other, not eliminating, but bringing together. That's new. Never happened before. Nobody knows what that will do. learning to listen, learning to partner, learning to walk with her and discover who we are in that process, how we are in that process. And it's not anything anybody can do by themselves, but that everyone has to do by themselves, for themselves, with others. It's both and. So join us in community. Go to community.living-regeneratively.world. Join the community and let's see what we can do together. But first, we have to learn to discern. So that's the first order of business, to become clear about what the earth is asking, how the earth works, how we can do that too, how we can change our lives. And there's way more that I will share on that. And then see what happens. I think it's exciting.